darkest secret, the house that devours souls. The town of Hallows End was like no other when it came to celebrating Halloween. For as long as anyone could remember, the entire town transformed each year into a landscape of eerie decorations, flickering jack-o'-lanterns, and elaborate costumes. But this year, something felt different. Something sinister lurked beneath the surface of the festivities. Alex, Jenny, Mark and Sarah had been best friends for years, and they always made the most of Halloween night. Their tradition was to visit the haunted house on the outskirts of town, a place that both fascinated and terrified them. The old mansion, abandoned for decades, was rumored to be cursed, and each year new stories about its haunted halls spread like wildfire among the townsfolk. This year the group felt an unusual pull toward the house, as if it was calling them. It had been a particularly chilly October, and the air was heavy with the scent of decaying leaves. The sky was overcast, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, casting an ominous darkness over the town. Despite the uneasy feeling gnawing at the back of their minds, the friends couldn't resist the allure of the haunted house. They convinced themselves that it would be like every other year, a few scares, some laughter, and then back to the warmth of their homes. But as they walked through the deserted streets, with the sounds of Halloween revelry fading into the distance, an unsettling silence surrounded them. The haunted house loomed ahead, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring into their souls. The closer they got, the colder it became, and a sense of dread settled over them. The old iron gate creaked as they pushed it open, and the overgrown path leading to the front door seemed to stretch on forever. The house's dark, imposing structure towered over them, and for a moment none of them could move. It was as if the house itself was alive, breathing, waiting. Jenny shivered, her breath visible in the cold night air. "Are we really doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Alex, always the brave one, nodded. "We've done it before, right? Just another Halloween tradition?" But as they crossed the threshold into the house, they knew this Halloween would be different. This Halloween, the haunted house would reveal its darkest secrets, and they might not all make it out alive. The inside of the haunted house was exactly as they remembered it, yet somehow more menacing. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and mold, and every creak of the floorboards underfoot echoed ominously through the empty halls. The walls were lined with faded, peeling wallpaper, and cobwebs hung like tattered curtains in the corners. The dim light from their flashlights cast long, flickering shadows that seemed to dance along the walls, as if the house itself was alive and watching their every move. The group moved cautiously through the entryway, their flashlights scanning the dusty furniture and the decaying remnants of a once grand home. The front door creaked shut behind them with a loud, resounding thud, making them all jump. The sound seemed to reverberate through the house, as if something deep within its bowels had stirred. "Why does it feel so much colder in here?" Mark muttered, rubbing his arms to ward off the chill. "It's just the house messing with us," Alex replied, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "Old places like this always have drafts." Jenny, who had always been the most sensitive to the supernatural, felt a deep unease settling in her chest. The house wasn't just cold, it felt hungry. "Maybe we should stick together this time," she suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. "No splitting up." "Agreed," Sarah said quickly, clutching her flashlight like a lifeline. The last thing she wanted was to be alone in this place. They ventured further into the house, passing through the parlor with its dust-covered furniture and into the dining room, where a long table still bore the remnants of a dinner long forgotten. Rotted food, broken dishes and overturned chairs. It was as if the previous occupants had left in a hurry, abandoning their meal to the decay of time. A sudden, sharp noise, a crash from somewhere upstairs, made them all freeze. The sound was followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the floor above them. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "Yeah, we all did," Alex replied, trying to keep his own fear in check. "It's probably just the house settling." "That didn't sound like settling," Jenny said, her eyes wide with fear. "That sounded like someone, or something, walking." Mark, always the skeptic, tried to sound nonchalant. "Maybe it's just an animal, a raccoon or something." But as the footsteps continued, growing louder and more distinct, they all knew that whatever was upstairs was no raccoon. "We should check it out," Alex said, trying to muster some courage. "If it's an animal, we can scare it off. If it's something else, we need to know what we're dealing with." Reluctantly, the others agreed, and they made their way to the grand staircase at the center of the house. The steps groaned under their weight as they ascended, the sound mingling with the echoing footsteps above. When they reached the top of the stairs, the sound abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing in on them from all sides. They stood there, flashlights aimed down the long, dark hallway, waiting for something, anything to happen. "Maybe we scared it off," Mark suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. But then, as if in response, a door at the far end of the hallway creaked open, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. A cold gust of air blew through the hall, making them shiver. "I guess that's our cue," Alex said, trying to sound brave. But even he felt the overwhelming sense of dread that permeated the house. They slowly approached the open door, their footsteps echoing loudly in the silence. When they reached it, they paused, exchanging nervous glances. Alex was the first to push the door open wider, revealing a large bedroom. The room was in a state of disarray, with the bed overturned and the furniture smashed to pieces. But what caught their attention was the large mirror on the wall opposite the bed. The mirror was old, its surface cloudy with age, but it seemed to pulse with a strange, otherworldly light. As they stared at it, they could see faint shapes moving within the glass, like shadows dancing just out of reach. "Is that someone in the mirror?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Can't be," Mark said, though he sounded less certain with each passing second. But then the shapes in the mirror began to take form, coalescing into distinct figures that looked disturbingly familiar. "That's us," Jenny whispered, her eyes wide with horror. "It's showing us." Indeed, the mirror reflected not just their physical appearance, but also their actions. They watched in stunned silence as their reflections moved independently, mimicking their every move with eerie precision. "This is messed up," Alex said, backing away from the mirror. "We need to get out of here." But as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. The house groaned as if in protest, and the temperature in the room dropped even further. Suddenly, the reflection of the room in the mirror changed. Instead of their own faces, the mirror now showed the image of a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children standing in the very same room. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, and their expressions filled with an indescribable sadness. "It's the family that lived here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "The ones who died in the fire." As they watched, the image in the mirror changed again, showing the family huddled together as flames engulfed the room. Their screams were silent, but the terror in their eyes was unmistakable. Then, without warning, the mirror cracked, a spiderweb of fractures spreading across its surface. The image of the burning family was distorted, their faces twisted in agony. "We need to get out of here now!" Jenny cried, tugging at the door, but it wouldn't budge. The house seemed to come alive around them, the walls closing in as the air grew thick with smoke. The smell of burning wood filled their nostrils, and they could hear the faint crackling of flames, though no fire was visible. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped with no way out. The house had them, and it wasn't going to let them go easily. Desperation gripped them as they struggled to find a way out. The walls seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, and the floor beneath their feet felt like it was shifting, making it difficult to keep their balance. "Try the window!" Alex shouted, pointing to the large, dust-covered window that overlooked the front yard. Mark ran to it, but as he reached for the latch, the glass shattered outward with a deafening crash. Shards of glass rained down on him, forcing him to stagger back with a cry of pain. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, rushing to his side. Mark nodded, though he was bleeding from several cuts on his arms. "It's like the house doesn't want us to leave," he said through gritted teeth. Jenny, her face pale with fear, was still staring at the cracked mirror. "It's not just the house," she whispered. "It's the spirits. They're trapped here, and they don't want us to leave because they can't." The room grew darker, the shadows lengthening and twisting into unnatural shapes. The once faint whispers became louder, more insistent, as if the spirits were trying to communicate with them. "We need to find another way out," Alex said, his voice tense. "Maybe there's another door or window in one of the other rooms." They hurried out of the bedroom, back into the hallway, only to find that it too had changed. The once straight corridor now twisted and turned in impossible ways, the walls lined with doors that hadn't been there before. Each door seemed to beckon them, promising either escape or something far worse. "Which one do we choose?" Sarah asked, her eyes darting between the doors. Before anyone could answer, the door they had just exited slammed shut, and the sound of footsteps echoed from behind them. But these footsteps were different from the ones they had heard before. They were heavier, more deliberate, as if something was stalking them. "Move!" Alex shouted, leading the group down the hall. They chose a door at random, bursting through it into what appeared to be a child's bedroom. The room was disturbingly pristine, as if untouched by time. Toys were neatly arranged on shelves, and a small bed was made up with a patchwork quilt. But the most unsettling thing was the doll sitting in the center of the bed, its glassy eyes staring directly at them. "Let's get out of here," Mark said. But before they could turn back, the door slammed shut again. The doll's head slowly turned to face them, and its mouth moved, though no sound came out. The air in the room grew thick with the scent of burning, and the walls began to blacken as if scorched by an invisible fire. "We're going in circles," Jenny said, her voice shaking. "The house is playing with us." "We have to stay calm," Alex replied, though his own fear was evident in his voice. "There has to be a way out." The doll suddenly toppled off the bed, landing on the floor with a dull thud. As it hit the ground, the room seemed to warp and twist, the walls closing in around them. "We can't stay here," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have to keep moving." They backed out of the room, only to find the hallway had changed once again. The walls were now lined with mirrors, each reflecting a distorted, nightmarish version of themselves. As they walked, the reflections seemed to mock them, their twisted faces grinning with malicious intent. "Don't look at them," Alex warned. "Just keep moving." But it was impossible not to look. And as they passed each mirror, the reflections grew more grotesque, their faces melting into horrific parodies of their own. Finally, they reached a door at the end of the hallway. It was large and ornate, unlike any of the others they had encountered. With no other options, they pushed it open and stepped inside. The room they entered was enormous, with high vaulted ceilings and walls lined with shelves filled with dusty old books. At the center of the room was a large table, and on it lay an open book, its pages yellowed with age. As they approached the table, the pages of the book began to turn on their own, as if guided by an unseen hand. The writing on the pages was in a language none of them could read, but the images that accompanied the text were clear enough. Depictions of dark rituals, ancient symbols, and creatures from beyond this world. "This is some kind of spell book," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But who was using it?" "Someone who lived here," Jenny replied, her eyes scanning the room. "Or maybe someone who still does." As if on cue, the room filled with a low rumbling sound, like distant thunder. The ground beneath their feet shook, and the air grew thick with the scent of sulfur. "We need to get out of here," Alex said. But before they could move, the door behind them slammed shut, and the walls began to close in. The house was alive, and it was hungry. Panic set in as the walls continued to close in, the room shrinking around them. The ancient book on the table began to glow with an eerie light, the pages turning faster and faster as if possessed by some dark force. The images on the pages became more disturbing, showing scenes of human sacrifice and summoning rituals meant to bring forth unspeakable horrors from the void. "We need to stop whatever this is," Alex said, his voice urgent. "There has to be a way to break the spell." "But how?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "We can't even read the book." Jenny, who had been quietly observing the room, suddenly spoke up. "The ritual, the one they were performing in the mirror. It wasn't finished. Maybe if we complete it, we can reverse it, or at least stop whatever's coming." "Are you crazy?" Mark exclaimed. "You want to finish a ritual that was probably meant to summon some demon or something? Do you have a better idea?" Jenny shot back. "If we don't do something, we're dead. This house isn't going to let us leave." Reluctantly, the others agreed, and they gathered around the table, their eyes fixed on the glowing book. The pages finally stopped turning, settling on a page that depicted a pentagram surrounded by strange symbols. "We need to draw this," Jenny said, pointing to the pentagram. "Does anyone have anything we can use?" Mark pulled out a piece of chalk from his pocket, something he had grabbed on a whim from his school supplies earlier that day. "Will this work?" "It'll have to," Jenny replied. They quickly cleared a space on the floor and began drawing the pentagram, copying the symbols from the book as best they could. As they worked, the temperature in the room dropped even further, and the walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. Once the pentagram was complete, they stood back, unsure of what to do next. "Now what?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before anyone could answer, the book began to glow even brighter, the light spilling out and filling the room. The air grew thick with tension, and a low, guttural growl echoed through the walls. "Whatever happens, we need to stay inside the circle," Jenny said, her voice firm. "It's the only thing protecting us." As if in response to her words, the ground beneath them shook violently, and the room was filled with a deafening roar. The walls seemed to melt away, revealing a swirling vortex of darkness, a void that stretched on forever. From the void emerged a figure, a tall, shadowy entity with eyes that burned like embers. It was the spirit of the house's original owner, but it had been twisted and corrupted by the dark forces it had sought to control. Its form was monstrous, a grotesque amalgamation of human and beast, and it radiated a palpable aura of malevolence. "You dare to trespass in my domain," the entity hissed, its voice echoing through the room like the tolling of a death knell. "You seek to undo what I have wrought?" "We just want to leave," Alex shouted, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. "Let us go!" The entity laughed, a sound that chilled them to the bone. "There is no escape. Your souls are mine now, just as theirs were before you." It gestured toward the vortex, and from within emerged the spirits of the family they had seen in the mirror. Their faces were twisted in agony, their eyes pleading for release. "Help us," the spirits whispered, their voices filled with despair. "Please, help us." Jenny stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "We can help them," she said, her voice trembling. "We can finish the ritual, but we have to do it together." The entity snarled, its eyes narrowing. "You will not defy me. You will not leave this place alive." With a wave of its hand, the pentagram on the floor began to glow, the symbols pulsing with a sickly green light. The ground beneath them shook violently, and the walls began to close in once more. But Jenny refused to back down. She knelt down, placing her hands on the pentagram, and began to chant the words from the book, her voice growing stronger with each passing moment. The others quickly joined in, their voices blending together as they recited the ancient incantation. The room was filled with a blinding light, and the air crackled with energy as the ritual reached its climax. The entity screamed in rage, its form beginning to dissolve as the power of the ritual took hold. The vortex of darkness began to close, the spirits of the trapped family swirling around it, their faces filled with relief as they were finally freed from their torment. "No!" the entity roared, its voice growing fainter as it was pulled into the void. "You cannot defeat me! You will all suffer!" But it was too late. With a final ear-splitting scream, the entity was consumed by the vortex, and the room was plunged into silence. The oppressive atmosphere that had weighed down on them lifted, replaced by a stillness that felt almost serene. The once twisted and malevolent house now seemed to sigh in relief, its walls returning to their normal, if still dilapidated, state. The glowing pentagram on the floor faded, leaving only a faint chalk outline. "We did it!" Jenny whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "We actually did it." The others were silent, still processing what had just happened. The room felt eerily quiet, as if the house itself was holding its breath. "Is it over?" Era asked, her voice trembling. "Are we really safe?" "I think so," Alex replied, though he sounded unsure. "But we should leave now." Without further hesitation, they made their way back to the front door. The house seemed to guide them, the hallways straightening out, and the oppressive darkness lifting. When they reached the door, it opened easily, and the cool night air greeted them like a long-lost friend. They stepped outside, the full moon casting a soft glow over the overgrown yard. The house, now silent and still, loomed behind them, its windows dark and lifeless. "We made it," Mark said, his voice filled with relief. "We actually made it." But Jenny, standing at the edge of the yard, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She turned back to look at the house, her eyes drawn to the upstairs window where they had first seen the spirits of the family. The window was dark, but as she stared, she could have sworn she saw a faint light flicker within, a single small flame, like a candle burning in the darkness. "Jenny?" Alex called, breaking her reverie. "You okay?" She forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. Let's go." As they walked away from the house, none of them noticed the figure standing in the window, watching them with hollow eyes. The house might have let them go, but it wasn't finished. It would wait, as it always had, for the next curious souls to come seeking its dark secrets. And when they did, it would be ready. Back in the town of Halloween, the night's festivities continued, unaware of the horrors that had transpired in the old mansion. The haunted house stood silent, its secrets hidden once more. But on the next Halloween, when the veil between worlds was thin, it would awaken again, ready to claim new victims. And so the legend of the haunted house would continue, passed down from generation to generation, a warning to those who might dare to explore its dark halls. But some would never heed the warning, drawn by the promise of a thrill or the lure of the unknown. And when they entered, the house would welcome them with open arms, ready to show them the true meaning of terror. As for Alex, Jenny, Sarah, and Mark, they would never forget that Halloween night. The horrors they faced would haunt them forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. And though they had escaped with their lives, they knew that the house was still out there, waiting for them to return. If this story sent shivers down your spine, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a terrifying new video. Your support helps us keep the horror alive, and there's plenty more where this came from. Stay scared, and we'll see you in the next nightmare.